Scott Schrader here with USC and On3 Sports, and want to record the latest episode of the No Cap podcast that we're doing here. We're going to be focusing on recruiting probably the month of June. We'll try and get some interviews with players and coaches as well, but right now I'm still going around visiting schools, visiting guys that are going to be taking official visits to USC on June 16th through the 19th. Guys are going to be arriving on different days, but it'll be during that time frame. USC will have at least 20, as of right now, 22 visitors are scheduled to come in, and probably in a week or so we'll get confirmation on how many guys are still planning on coming, because we're told a few might not make it. So anyway, but today I want to kind of like go down the list and kind of recap on when we started learning about potential transfers and the communications that we were having back and forth with people that we trust and sources and so on. And we're going to start with Caleb Williams. Obviously, that was the big one. There were a few big ones, but this was the biggest of the big ones. And what was interesting is that we were kind of like the first to report that we heard that Caleb Williams was going to consider ending the transfer portal, and we had posted that on our site, USC. Not long after the football season ended, and not long after Lincoln Riley was hired by USC, and we really didn't hear a whole lot for a stretch. But the one thing that we were told by an Oklahoma source, a source that I trust, like I trust myself, it told us that it was going to be likely USC, but Caleb was going to look at a few other schools, one of them being UCLA, and that was pretty much the only school we really had heard of. If some factors had happened with a coaching scenario, UCLA, I think that maybe that might have become a more realistic option, but it was always going to be USC reuniting with Lincoln Riley unless something not good happened. And I think that there was a surprise element that took Caleb Williams and his family kind of aback when Lincoln did take the job at USC. But obviously, to make a long story short, all of that got worked out. But there was a lot of drama going on, and a lot of stuff that people were hearing on Twitter, hearing on Facebook, seeing it on IG. There was just all kinds of rumors. There was even somebody that predicted Caleb Williams going to Wisconsin. But we were always kind of dialed in on what was going on, and we never wavered from where we stood with Caleb Williams and him ending up at USC, and the buildup was ridiculous by the time that Caleb did announce, because there were some people that were like, I don't even care anymore, and there were other people that couldn't wait for him to announce for USC, and there were others that were like, God, I don't even want him to come to USC. There's too much drama. Everybody kind of got over that when he did announce, and he ended up at USC, and they saw what Caleb Williams brings to the University of Southern California football program. But what was interesting is that when the transfer portal stuff started happening with him and Mario Williams, the thinking was, and I know Mario thought this was the way it was going to happen, is that he was going to announce first, and then Caleb was going to follow shortly after. Well, it didn't turn out that way, and he ended up having Mario announce fairly quickly after he visited USC in Texas. I don't know if it was maybe a week or so. So that one was down, so everybody was kind of like, all right, Caleb is definitely going to USC. But then that 2 or 3 weeks, I don't even know how long the period of time was, but it seemed like forever for me, because we're trying to stay on top of it. We're trying to answer questions during this stretch. And of course, it was great for traffic for the website. We weren't like purposely putting stuff out there to get people to come to the site, because this was a real topic and a real outcome for USC, as it turns out. So it was just really kind of a crazy period. But what it did show, when Caleb and Mario Williams both signed with USC, it just kind of showed the power of Lincoln Riley that he has on some of these kids, and the impact that he has. Let's not forget Latrell Mccutchen too. When he first entered the transfer portal, I hit up Latrell Mccutchen and just asked him if USC was going to be an option, and he said Lincoln Riley will always be a top choice. And the word was originally that USC wasn't sure they were going to be interested in bringing in Latrell Mccutchen, but then they were. Then he visited. I remember asking if he ever made it to USC, and Latrell sent me a photograph of him on a golf cart dressed in the USC uniform, ready to go to a photo shoot. And he just said, 2 thumbs up or something like that. I forget the reply. He went home. There was some thinking that maybe Baylor was going to be the choice for Latrell, and now USC was in the mix, and we were hearing it was going to be USC. So the next time I hit up Latrell was asking him, there was a time frame on him announcing. And the reply was about 2 hours later, now ? And literally like a minute later, he did announce on Twitter that he had committed to USC. So those were like 3 that we kind of knew were going to happen. There were obviously different roads that each guy took to ending up at USC. Mario and Latrell was pretty much drama-free and just kind of quick, and it happened. I think Caleb was a far different situation, and I think that process actually ended up being valuable, that it did take that long. So with those 3 guys in place, then you start with Shane Lee. Shane Lee was somebody that we knew entered the transfer portal. Didn't know he had a relationship with Caleb Williams, which you're starting to learn that those relationships are pretty strong, a la Jordan Addison, who we will get to in a little bit and talk about his path to USC. But Shane Lee, we had heard that he was going to end up at USC, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on with transfer portal stuff. The high school stuff, the information kind of flows freely for us from sources and so on. It gets really, really tight when you start talking about transfer portal stuff, because the thinking is it's real sensitive, and these schools just want to get kids in for a visit and get them committed and get them signed and get them on campus. Just eliminate all the drama. So little by little it warmed up and we started learning stuff about the transfers. But Shane Lee, I didn't know what his time frame was, and it that didn't last long either. And that was another big pickup. Austin Jones was announced on Twitter. Didn't even know USC was interested. I did know that Austin Jones was interested in USC in high school, because Austin was a kid. He actually he and his father traveled down to 2, not 1, 2 USC summer football camps. Paid the money. USC didn't even know he was going to be there. They didn't invite him or anything. He wanted to go there and show him that he was worthy of a scholarship, because USC is where he wanted to go to school. He had the offer from Stanford, which is, was where he ended up. But so when he entered the transfer portal, I was thinking, USC would be an option, but we weren't hearing much about USC's interest. So he ended up getting announced on social media. I hit him up via text, because I had actually communicated him occasionally with Austin Jones while he was at Stanford. Just, when I had sent him photographs from games when USC played him and so on, just checking and wishing him happy birthday and stuff like that. Just a kid who you can't help but love, and great family. And when he ended up announcing for USC, I was personally really, really fired up, because he's just one of those guys you just root for and you look forward to watching play. Jacoby Covington. Here's another one. Here's a kid that I think had a lot of interest in USC during the recruiting process out of high school, but USC just wasn't a program that was able to close on a lot of these guys. And he ended up going to Washington, where there was a lot of good reasons as a defensive back to go to Washington. Jimmy Lake, did a fantastic job with defensive backs and as a defensive coordinator. So Jacoby hits the transfer portal, and I hit him up after he visited USC and just asked him, hey, how does USC compare 2022 compared to 2019 or 2020? I forget exactly what year he visited USC last. But his reply was, get ready for USC to take over college football. And it's a pretty strong statement. Whether that's going to happen or not is kind of irrelevant to the fact that it just indicated how strong his interest was and how impressed he was with what he saw at USC and with the program that Lincoln Riley had brought to USC. So we kind of knew that he was going to end up at USC as well. Romello Height, he was a guy too that actually visited USC during the recruiting process, and I know that he also liked it out there, but they just could not close the deal on him. Chris Thompson Jr., was a teammate of his at Auburn. So we were kind of like knowing that Romello had an interest in USC, and so when he ended up taking a visit and announced his commitment, it was not surprising. We didn't have any deep sources on this. It was telling us when stuff was going to happen, and things were all kind of quiet on that. Brendan Rice is kind of another guy that when he visited USC, we knew he was going. We had a story ready for him well in advance, and the same with Earl Barquette from TCU. We knew some people at TCU that were kind of giving us the heads up on him. And so that kind of leads us to, there's going to be Carson Tabaracci. He was a guy that we knew weeks before he announced. We had our story ready for his commitment. We knew that Stevie Nomura was kind of like his main host when he was taking his official visit. Ray Jean was kind of involved a little bit. So that's a big time player that USC did want out of high school. So these additions, we focus oftentimes on Caleb Williams, Mario Williams, Jordan Addison, and those guys. And those are the big name guys that they did get. But at the same time, there are a tremendous number of really talented guys that are going to be able to come in and play at USC or contribute immediately and make an impact. So Bryson Shaw, I was in Arizona at a 7-on-7 event watching Malachi Nelson and Makai Lemon. And then it was announced by his father, Bryson Shaw, that he had committed to USC. That one was kind of like kept under the rug with us. We didn't know. There might have been some other sites that kind of knew what was going on, but we obviously knew people that were in the transfer portal, but this was one that just kind of like, damn, okay. It's kind of a big pickup. You're talking about a guy that played a lot of minutes at Ohio State. Whether or not he was going to, maybe be reduced to a backup role at Ohio State this year is kind of irrelevant at this point, because he's a big time pickup for USC under the circumstances right now, a guy that can come in and make a big impact. And that's what Lincoln Riley was looking for from the transfer portal. Guys that could come in, be the type of personality that they wanted, and guys that could come in and make an impact. Now, obviously, all of the guys aren't going to be able to make a big impact, but they brought in guys that are at least going to be able to contribute and fill some serious depth issues. Eric Gentry was an interesting one because I got a phone call. I was at an Under Armour camp at Mission Viejo, and this was like a month before Eric Gentry entered the transfer portal, and I was told then that he was going to enter the transfer portal and he was going to end up at USC. And I was like, okay, he's not even in the transfer portal, and I was like, how do you know what school he's going to end up at? And this is from an ASU source, so this was not coming from USC because they weren't going to tell me anything on Eric Gentry. I can promise you that. So when his whole thing ended up happening, there was no doubt in our mind as soon as he did enter the transfer portal and it was announced that he was going to end up at USC, he took the visit, boom, there you are, big pickup, linebacker. Travis Dye was another one that we knew, had interest in USC, and we knew he was going to end up at USC after he visited, but, it was like when he entered the transfer portal and it's still kind of hard to wrap our heads around the fact that Travis Dye will probably be the starting running back at USC this year, considering that Oregon has just been beating the snot out of USC for the last 3-4, I don't know how many years it is now, but it's a lot. Been beating USC's butt on the field and off the field. So this was one of those. This was a big pickup for USC, and I think the running back room at USC with the transfers they brought in and Darwin Barlow from last year, a carryover into this season. It was just a really tremendously talented running back room. So I think fans are going to be in for a treat this year. Tyrone Tulane, we didn't know much about him. He kind of came out of nowhere, commits to USC. Terrell Bynum, same thing. Wasn't really hearing a whole lot about him. And it was just, that's kind of how stuff sometimes happens in the transfer portal. You don't hear a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of fanfare. These kids don't need to be wined and dined and go through this elaborate process. They just take care of business. And that definitely happened with him. Bobby Haskins, we kind of knew when he came out for his visit that, his dad we were told was already talking about moving out to California to be here and to be able to watch Bobby play his last year at USC. So, I think that's a big pickup. He wasn't able to participate in spring ball, but he is a guy that USC expects to contribute quite significantly based off what they saw from him at the University of Virginia. So, if he's healthy in fall camp, which we are anticipating he will be, that's a big addition to the offensive line. Solomon Byrd, another guy that just kind of came in, took care of business, boom, committed to USC. Wasn't a surprise, but it wasn't a whole lot of fanfare on that one either. But the one thing we're told by people that kind of know Solomon, that this is a far bigger pickup than we might realize, and so we'll see how that all turns out. We weren't able to obviously see him play in the spring, and being that he was not at the University of Southern California then, but he's a guy that we'll definitely be looking forward to watching in the fall and see where he might end up fitting in with the depth chart. But from what we're told, he's a guy that USC expects to make some big contributions in 2022. So Sinjin Astani, preferred walk-on. His dream was to always play at USC, and that opportunity came to be a preferred walk-on, and he grabbed it. He had Division I scholarship offers from other schools, but he turned those down to be at USC. And that brings us to Makai Blackman from the University of Colorado, defensive back, cornerback, going to be in Dante Williams' room. I know the feeling at USC is that this is an NFL prospect, a guy that won't go in the lower rounds, will go in the mid to higher rounds. And so, here's another guy. Will he come in and be a starter? We weren't able to see him at the spring game because he was sitting out with some nagging injuries or whatever. I'm not even sure what his injury was, but there were a bunch of guys that were sitting out because Lincoln Riley just didn't feel like it was worth them going into the spring game and aggravating an injury and have it become worse or injuring themselves worse somewhere else. So he did not play, but he is a guy that USC expects big stuff from this fall. So just want to kind of go over some of the transfers. I don't know if I'm missing any. I'm just kind of going through my cheat sheet here. I'm looking at WeAreSC's database, and I think we did cover them all. But the transfer portal has been really good to USC, and they're not done yet. The word I'm always asking, sources, are you guys done? And it's like, we're never done. The transfer portal is something that USC is always looking at. They're always looking for ways to get better. Whether that's adding depth to the roster, that's looking for plays, that's looking for whatever it might be, strength conditioning program stuff, speed, training, whatever it might be. This is a program that Lincoln Riley wants to win now. And I know we say that all the time, and USC fans read that all the time. But, it's obviously a message that's resonating with the players on the football team and recruits, because, recruits want to go play for a program, that is going to win and wants to win. And not just wants to win big. So, we'll end up looking forward to watching these guys in the fall.